The sound of the slap didn't echo, it detonated. For a second, even the birds went silent. My cheek stung with a heat so fierce it almost hummed the imprint of his hand burning through skin and bone. The string quartet froze, mid-note bows suspended in air like evidence. The guests stopped breathing. 200 faces turned toward me, mouths half open, the collective gasp trapped somewhere between disbelief and shame. I tasted metal blood and the faint sweetness of the champagne I had just lifted in a toast that would never finish. My veil slipped sideways, snagging on one pearl earring. The wind teased it like a cruel spectator. Julian's face hovered in front of me, flushed, wild, his fingers still half curled, unsure if they belonged to him or to the monster he had just unleashed. His lips trembled not from regret, but from fury, from something that looked like triumph. His sister Veronica stood just behind him, her lipstick a calm red slash against her pale skin. She didn't move. She didn't have to. Her eyes were enough sharp, cold, triumphant. Somewhere a glass hit the ground and shattered. The sound was small compared to the roaring in my ears. I had imagined many versions of this day, joy tears the soft collapse of old pain giving way to new beginnings. Not this. Not violence dressed in tuxedos and roses. My hands, still holding the bouquet, trembled only once. Then I straightened them one petal, falling between my fingers, brown at the edges like something already dead. Everyone waited for me to cry, to run, to beg for an explanation that would never come. I looked at Julian, the man I had trusted, the man whose child I carried, though no one knew yet, and in the reflection of his eyes, I saw the truth. The slap was not an accident, it was revelation. The end disguised as a beginning. The silence grew unbearable, the kind that breaks or baptizes. I chose neither. I steadied my voice low and deliberate and said the words that cracked the stillness clean in two. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Julian." Then I smiled small and razor sharp. "Let me tell you how we got here. I was 8 when I first learned that silence could save me. My mother, Margaret Hart, used to say that quiet women lived longer. She said it softly, her lips cracked from worry, her hands trembling from another night of pretending everything was fine. When she remarried, the house filled with the kind of peace that bruised instead of soothed. My stepfather Leonard loved order plates, aligned shoes, facing east, voices low. Every dinner was a test I could never pass. If I laughed too loudly, his hand would strike the table first, then my cheek. If I spoke back, the punishment came later in shadows where apologies couldn't be heard. Mother called it discipline, a necessary correction. She'd whisper that I was too much like my real father, reckless, defiant, loud. So I learned how to be small, how to fold myself into corners and breathe without sound. Years later, when I left that house at 18 with one suitcase and a scholarship, I swore I'd never belong to anyone again. Freedom tasted like cold air through a bus window, like coffee I could afford by myself. I studied numbers, became an accountant, because numbers didn't lie, didn't yell, didn't hit. They obeyed rules. If you traced them correctly, they revealed the truth. For years, I thought that truth would keep me safe. It didn't. I met Julian Ashford on a rainy afternoon outside a courthouse. I had just finished auditing a small firm accused of embezzlement. He was there to handle his company's real estate paperwork. He held an umbrella over me without asking, smiled with that easy confidence of men who have never been told no. His voice was steady, deliberate, with the faintest hint of care. "You look like you could use 5 minutes of kindness," he said. I wanted to believe him. Over months, he became a constant rhythm in my life. Flowers on Mondays, dinners on Fridays, whispered promises on Sundays. His wealth was old money, the kind that spoke in whispers, not boasts. He said I made him feel real human grounded. When he touched me, it was gentle but certain. He said my calmness steadied him. I thought that meant love. I didn't see how closely admiration could resemble possession. When he asked me to move in, his tone wasn't a question. It was an expectation wrapped in affection. "You're safest with me, Evelyn," he said. The words sounded like comfort then. Now I know they were a cage being built one syllable at a time. I said yes anyway. Because silence was easier than explaining the ache that still lived in my bones, the one that whispered maybe this time quiet would mean peace. Julian Ashford's world was made of glass, clear, reflective, and sharp if you touched it wrong. He lived in a penthouse that smelled of citrus and polish, where every object had its place, and every word had its consequence. When he kissed me, he did it like he was making a promise he didn't intend to break. When he looked at me, I felt seen, but later I realized he was studying me, memorizing the edges, measuring control. He introduced me to his sister Veronica 6 months into the relationship. She arrived late to lunch wearing white, though the invitation had said formal black. Her entrance was a performance. She hugged Julian first, her red nails against his back, her perfume expensive, suffocating, filling the space before she even spoke. "So this is the famous Evelyn," she said, her smile like glass, transparent and dangerous. "You're prettier than I expected." I smiled back. "That's usually a compliment." She laughed not kindly and ordered for all 3 of us without asking. Julian chuckled as if this was normal. He called her protective. I called it warning. The conversation that afternoon was an audit of my existence, my parents, my job, my apartment, my ambitions. A forensic accountant, she repeated, turning the words over like they were strange coins. "You must love rules. I love what the truth looks like on paper," I said. Her eyes flickered. "How noble!" When the waiter brought the check, she slid it toward Julian. "You always did have a thing for the broken ones," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. He squeezed my hand under the table too tightly, a silent apology that still hurt. After that day, small cracks formed. Julian began asking where I went after work, who called me. He said it was love. "I just worry, Evie. You're too trusting." He asked for my password, said transparency was the key to honesty. I told myself it was fine. My mother had once said that love requires trust. I forgot she had also said that control often wears love's clothing. Veronica called frequently. "You're lucky," she'd say. "Julian's generous when he wants to be." When he wasn't, she'd add softly, "Just give him time." She began attending wedding fittings, though she wasn't in the bridal party. She commented on the dress too modest, the flowers too plain, and on me, "You'll learn how to carry the Ashford name." Every word she spoke was a thread tightening around my throat. Julian's father, Charles, approved of me in the way a banker approves a loan. "You seem disciplined," he said. "Julian needs that." His smile never reached his eyes. When I asked Julian later why his family seemed so cold, he sighed. "They've seen too many people chase us for money. You're different." But I saw it then, the faint flicker of doubt Veronica had planted. It grew quietly, feeding on every silence, every question he didn't ask out loud. At night, he'd trace my face with his fingers, as if memorizing something he planned to forget. "You'll never lie to me, right?" he whispered once. "Never," I said. But he didn't answer. That was the first time I realized that Julian didn't want a partner. He wanted proof that I was safe, obedient, predictable. I fell asleep beside him that night, the city lights painting lines across his face, and I wondered how love could look so much like surveillance. It started so quietly, I almost mistook it for care. Julian asked me to quit my job 3 months before the wedding. He said it gently in that soothing tone he used when wrapping a command in velvet. "You don't need to drown in spreadsheets anymore. My firm has accountants. You should rest plan the wedding, focus on us." I laughed, at first thought he was joking, but when I returned home one night past 9, he was waiting in the dark, the glow from his phone lighting the edge of his jaw. "You didn't text," he said. "You usually text." His voice was calm, but coiled. I apologized, though I hadn't done anything wrong. The next day, he installed a location-sharing app on my phone. "For emergencies," he said. "You never know." The same week, he transferred $5,000 into my account. "For wedding things," he added, smiling. "I trust you." I didn't touch a cent. Veronica called that evening. "He's finally learning to take care of someone," she said. "Don't make him regret it." Her voice had the same cadence as my mother's years ago when she told me to stay quiet to avoid being hit. That night, I dreamed of my stepfather's hands, steady, patient, full of order. Julian began correcting me in small ways. My dress was a little too short for dinner with investors. My laugh was too sharp. My tone when speaking to waiters was a bit distant. He said he wanted me to fit in with the Ashfords. "You're better than they think," he whispered as if it were a compliment. But every time he said better, he meant quieter. The wedding planning became an Ashford operation. Veronica handled the guest list, Charles negotiated the venue, and I was left to pick between shades of white that looked identical. The planner sent me invoices to approve, but Julian's email always appeared before mine. "I'm simplifying things," he said. "You hate paperwork." That was the moment I started keeping copies of everything: receipts, invoices, bank transfers. I told myself it was habit, the accountant in me refusing to die. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for something I couldn't name yet. He began checking my phone under the pretext of protecting me from online scams. He deleted a message from my colleague Laura that said lunch tomorrow and told me she seemed too curious about our finances. "People use friendship to get close," he warned. "You're naive." I wanted to believe he was paranoid because he cared that his need for control was love distorted by fear. But then came the night he called me from his office, his voice flat. "Why is your ex on LinkedIn?" I didn't answer. I saw the notification. "You accepted his connection request." I told him it was automatic. He didn't respond. When I got home, the wine glasses were already set. He poured one for himself, none for me. "You make me do this," he said quietly, and the way he said it froze my spine. "You push me to be someone I hate." He didn't touch me that night, but the silence afterward was heavier than any bruise. I started writing down every detail in a notebook titled, "For My Own Sanity." Date time, words tone, a habit of evidence. He called it our adjustment period. I called it the beginning of my disappearance. Somewhere in that tightening orbit of control, I realized love wasn't supposed to make you shrink. But I stayed, because leaving required confrontation, and confrontation was still the language that frightened me most. The first crack came disguised as coincidence. 3 months before the wedding, I stayed late at Julian's office to drop off some signed documents. His assistant was gone. The lights were dim except for the strip of amber under his door. I heard voices. Veronica's low, sharp, deliberate, and Julian's the quieter tone of someone being persuaded. "You can't just pretend she's not after something," Veronica said. "You don't know her like I do," he replied. "She's not like the others." "I had her background checked," she said. The sound of papers rustling followed. "Student loans, credit cards, one bankruptcy. You think she loves you for you." "Stop," Julian muttered. "You're wrong. Am I, or do you just want to believe it?" The silence that followed was louder than any argument. My breath caught. The hallway was cold. My fingers shook around the folder I held. The paper whispered when I turned away. I left without knocking. That night, Julian came home with tulips, my favorite, the color of pale bone, and kissed my forehead. "Rough day," he said. His smile looked rehearsed. I stared at the flowers. "Do you trust me?" I asked. He froze. "Why would you ask that? Just answer." "Of course I do." He cupped my face, the same hand that would later strike it. "Don't let Veronica get to you. She's overprotective." He laughed, but his eyes flickered brief, unguarded panic. After he slept, I opened his laptop. The folder labeled contracts held an encrypted file. When I decrypted it, I found bank statements from Ashford Development's payments to vendors I'd never heard of, shell companies with no registered addresses. One was named V Holdings, another Charmar Consulting. My stomach turned. The transaction trail ran for years. Someone was moving money carefully, quietly in increments just small enough to avoid internal audit. I copied everything to a flash drive and emailed it to myself. At 2 in the morning, I sat in the dark kitchen staring at the glow of my phone. I thought about the conversation I had overheard about Veronica's warning that I was after the family's money and realized something colder she was projecting. She was already stealing. The next morning, Julian kissed me as if nothing had happened. He made pancakes, poured coffee into my favorite mug, and told me he'd arranged a weekend in the Hamptons. "We deserve peace," he said. I nodded, pretending not to notice that his phone never left his hand, that every time he glanced at the screen, his jaw tightened. I told myself to wait to collect more proof before saying anything, but waiting meant acting normal, smiling, laughing, loving him like the world wasn't shifting beneath my feet. At dinner, he reached across the table. "Promise me something," he said. "What?" "That you'll never hide anything from me." The words caught in my throat. "I promise." "Good." He smiled satisfied and poured me more wine. The scent of the tulips filled the room sickly sweet. 2 weeks later, I found the first physical sign of his doubt, a folder left on his desk. Inside was a printed dossier, my credit history, old addresses, employment verification. At the bottom, a sticky note in Veronica's handwriting read, "She's good. Too good." I didn't confront him. I took the folder, scanned it, and placed it back. That night, he held me tighter than usual, murmuring that I was the best thing that ever happened to him. His breath was heavy with guilt. I watched the ceiling instead of sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I saw the flash drive, the false vendors, the ledgers. The pattern was clear now. Veronica was laundering money, and Julian's doubt was her insurance. If she could make him see me as the threat, he'd never suspect her. I understood what my mother once meant when she said some people don't break you, they make you destroy yourself. I was being positioned for a fall I hadn't even reached yet. I touched my stomach, feeling the smallest flutter of life inside me. Julian didn't know I was pregnant. Maybe he never would. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "If truth is my only weapon, I'll need it loaded before the war begins." The morning light came in gray ribbons across the apartment, slicing through the blinds like it was measuring the room. I hadn't slept. Julian had already left for the estate by the time I opened my eyes. His side of the bed was cold, his scent lingering faintly of cedar and something metallic. On the kitchen counter, he'd left a note. "Rehearsal at 6. Don't be late. Remember, this day isn't just about us. It's about the family." My hands trembled when I folded the note. Family. The word felt like a threat disguised as a promise. I turned on my laptop and opened the files again. The bank statements, invoices, routing numbers. My screen glowed with evidence, the rhythm of digits and names that told the truth better than words ever could. V Holdings had moved another $30,000 last week. The signature on the approval line was Julian's, or a version of it, a forged one. I'd spent the past week quietly confirming it through handwriting analysis software matching patterns of loops and pressure points. It wasn't his. It was Veronica's. That discovery should have brought relief, but instead it hollowed me out. He was innocent and still cruel. I was proving a truth that wouldn't save me. By noon, I'd backed up everything into 3 encrypted drives, one hidden in my luggage, one mailed to my work email, and one sent to a trusted friend, Laura. I wrote her a message, "If anything happens, give this to the police." She replied immediately, "What's going on?" I didn't answer. Fear doesn't explain itself. It documents. At 5, the driver sent by Charles arrived to take me to the rehearsal. The car smelled of leather and silence. Outside, the Ashford estate loomed against the horizon, an empire of glass and stone overlooking the river. Staff moved like clockwork, polishing silver, arranging flowers, their smiles rehearsed. Veronica stood at the top of the stairs, her burgundy dress tailored to precision. "You look pale," she said. "Nerves, clarity," I replied. Her smile thinned. "Let's hope you don't embarrass my brother tomorrow. He's worked too hard for this." She leaned in close, her perfume sharp as alcohol. "Remember, Evelyn, appearances are everything." That night, I sat by the window in the bridal suite watching the river move beneath the moonlight. Julian came in late. He smelled of whiskey. His tie was loose, his smile brittle. "My father's proud," he said. "He said you might finally make me steady." He touched my cheek gently. "I can't lose you, Evie. Promise me we'll be perfect tomorrow." His hand lingered on my jaw just long enough for me to remember how easily it could turn to pain. "We'll be whatever we need to be," I said. When he left, I took out my notebook and wrote down every account number, every false vendor, every lie. Then, at the bottom of the page, I added a new line. "If love is blind, then tomorrow I'll open every eye in that garden." The clock struck midnight. Somewhere in the house, laughter echoed Veronica's low and certain. I closed my eyes and saw the outline of the wedding dress hanging by the door. It looked ghostly in the dim light, a monument to promises that were never real. I whispered to the dark, "You wanted a perfect bride, Julian. You'll have one, just not the kind you expected." The sun rose clean and cruel, too bright for what the day would become. From the balcony of the bridal suite, the Ashford estate looked flawless, white tints billowing over manicured lawns, the river reflecting gold, hundreds of chairs in perfect rows. Everything gleamed. It was a mirror built to blind. Makeup artists swarmed me at dawn, speaking softly as they pinned and powdered. "You're glowing," one of them said. I wanted to tell her it was fear. Beneath the silk and lace, my hands were ice. The dress ivory embroidered with glass beads felt heavier than armor, lighter than safety. When Veronica entered, her heels clicked like punctuation. "You look beautiful," she said, smiling into the mirror where I sat. "Almost like you belong." I met her reflection with calm eyes. Almost, I agreed. She leaned close enough for her perfume to burn. "Julian's been tense. Don't upset him today. You know how he hates scenes." "I'll remember," I said. She paused, her voice lower. "And remember, family stands together, even when outsiders fall." Then she was gone, leaving the faint trail of winter roses and threat. The ceremony began at 3. The air smelled of roses and polished silver. Charles waited by the fountain, shaking hands, proud of the empire he'd built. Guests murmured, sipped champagne, adjusted hats. I walked down the aisle on the arm of my uncle, the only blood family I had left. He squeezed my hand once silently, reminding me I was still real. Julian looked radiant in his tuxedo, that old cinematic glow around him. For a brief, dangerous moment, I wanted to believe we could still have peace. But peace was never part of their language. When the vows ended and the applause began, the orchestra played soft and hopeful. The photographs were taken, the laughter rehearsed. I drank half a glass of champagne and tasted metal again. By 5, the reception blurred into noise. The sun dipped low, painting everything gold. Julian had drifted from group to group, his charm switched back on. Veronica hovered nearby, a crimson shadow. I was standing by the fountain bouquet, wilting slightly when she approached him. She handed him an envelope. I saw the white flash of paper, the tightness in his jaw as he unfolded it. For a heartbeat, his expression emptied, then filled with something dark and absolute. His hand clenched the page, crumpling it. I didn't know what she had given him, but I knew who had forged it. He turned toward me slowly, like gravity itself had shifted. The crowd parted without being told. My heart began counting down. He stopped in front of me, close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. His voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "Is it true? Is what true?" I whispered. "You know." His eyes flicked to the guests, then back. "The money, the accounts. You've been stealing from me." My throat tightened. "Julian, no." The slap landed before the sentence could finish. Hard, clean, final. The sound cracked the air open. Pain radiated through my skull down my spine. I tasted blood. Somewhere, a woman gasped. Another whispered, "My God." My bouquet hit the ground. A petal floated into the fountain. Julian's chest heaved. Behind him, Veronica covered her mouth with both hands, feigning horror. For a second, no one moved. I could hear the river. I could hear my own heartbeat. I lifted my head. My veil hung crooked, my hair undone, my dignity bleeding, but intact. "You just hit your wife," I said. My voice came out calm, cold, steady. "In front of your father, your guests, and your cameras." He blinked, confusion flickering through rage. "You stole from me," he hissed. "No," I said louder now. "But I know who did." The silence around us fractured. Phones appeared. Cameras recorded. I met Veronica's eyes across the garden. Her face froze for the first time that day. "You wanted a scene," I said softly. "Let's give them one." The guests were statues, their smiles suspended midair, their glasses hovering uselessly in trembling hands. The orchestra had stopped. Even the wind seemed to lean in. My cheek pulsed with heat, but my voice came cold and measured. "You think I stole from you, Julian? You think I'd risk prison for a man who can't even look at his own reflection?" His mouth opened, but I didn't let him speak. "You want truth? Fine, let's show everyone what truth looks like." I bent down, slowly picked up my bouquet and placed it gently on the table beside me like evidence in court. Then I reached into the bodice of my dress where I'd taped a small flash drive sealed in clear plastic. The gasp from the nearest guest rippled through the crowd. This, I said, holding it up between my fingers, contains every financial transaction processed through Ashford Developments for the last 5 years. Every invoice, every vendor, every shell company. Do you know what I found, Julian? My voice rose slightly. Not a shout, just enough to carry. Money funneled to accounts with no registered business invoices for work that doesn't exist. Signatures that aren't yours. I turned toward Veronica, whose smile had finally cracked. Yours though they are. The crowd shifted like a wave. Julian blinked, confusion overtaking fury. Stop, Veronica snapped. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? I stepped closer to her, the cameras flashing like lightning. You forged his signature, created false vendors, and laundered millions through V, Holdings, and Charmar Consulting. You blamed me before anyone could look at you. I glanced at Julian. She told you I was after your money, the same lie she used when she drained your accounts. Veronica laughed brittle. Do you have proof or just theatrics? Proof, I said, tapping the flash drive. And backups in multiple locations. Your brother's signature analysis won't match these transfers, but yours will. Murmurs grew into noise. A few guests stepped back, distancing themselves as if guilt were contagious. Julian's father, Charles, looked suddenly pale, gripping his glass too tightly. You're lying, Veronica hissed. You're pathetic. I smiled, the calm of someone who's already won. Maybe. But the numbers don't lie, and the police will confirm that soon enough. I gestured toward the event photographer. You've been recording this whole time, haven't you? Make sure the footage is backed up. I wouldn't want anyone to say this didn't happen. Someone clapped nervously, then another. The sound spread awkwardly through the garden like thunder with nowhere to go. Julian's face crumbled, rage giving way to realization. Veronica, he whispered. She didn't answer. Tell him I said. Tell your brother where his money went. Veronica's lips parted, but no sound came. Her silence was confession enough. You lied to me, Julian muttered, his voice cracking, but I didn't know who he meant, her or me. No, I said quietly. You lied to yourself. I turned to the crowd. I came here to marry a man I thought I knew. Instead, I found an empire built on manipulation and fear. But here's the difference between me and them. I document everything. I raised my chin, the lights burning into my skin. If I disappear tonight, if anything happens to me, you all saw this. You all heard me. Veronica lunged forward, face flushed. You think this will destroy me, she hissed. No, Evelyn. You've only made yourself a target. I met her glare with calm precision. Maybe, but I prefer being a moving target to being a silent victim. The crowd erupted in whispers, the air vibrating with judgment and disbelief. Julian stumbled backward, his suit smeared with the ashes of his own arrogance. For the first time, he looked small. I slipped the flash drive into the inside pocket of his jacket. Call your lawyer, I said softly. You'll need him. Then I turned to the officiant, still frozen by the fountain. This wedding is over. My voice carried clean and sharp across the stunned garden. I withdraw my consent. I walked toward the gates, the hem of my dress dragging through spilled champagne and petals, the cameras following, recording every step of my exit. Behind me, I heard a scream, Veronica's, and then Julian's broken plea. I didn't turn around. The sound of their ruin was enough. The video spread faster than the truth ever could. Before midnight, hashtags bloomed across social media. The slapped bride. Ashford scandal. The accountant who fought back. By morning, reporters camped outside the estate gates, cameras pointed at the marble facade that once symbolized power and now reeked of disgrace. Julian's PR team tried to bury the footage, but the internet had already claimed it. 2 minutes of humiliation preserved forever. The slap, the accusation, my voice steady and unbroken as I dismantled the Ashford empire in front of 200 witnesses. I spent that night at my uncle's house. My cheek had turned deep red, the skin hot to the touch. He handed me ice and said nothing for a long while. You did the right thing, he finally murmured. Sometimes right and ruin look the same, I whispered back. The police called the next morning. An anonymous tip my files had been sent to the Financial Crimes Unit. I didn't ask who forwarded them. Some truths deliver themselves. Within 48 hours, investigators raided Ashford Developments. The numbers I'd uncovered spoke louder than my voice ever could. Veronica's shell company's offshore accounts falsified vendor lists. It all unraveled under forensic review. She was arrested first, her mugshot appearing on every news channel, flawless makeup, hollow eyes. Julian wasn't charged, but his company's stock plummeted. His father collapsed during a board meeting, clutching his chest. The empire fractured. I watched it all on television from my couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of smoke from my uncle's fireplace. When the reporters approached me for a statement, I gave them one sentence. Accountability doesn't ruin people, it reveals them. The words echoed everywhere. People wanted a symbol, and I became one. The calm woman in a ruined wedding dress standing tall while her abuser trembled. My face appeared in think pieces about domestic violence, financial abuse, and gaslighting. My inbox filled with stories from women who saw themselves in mine. One email stayed with me. "Thank you for showing that silence isn't survival." I didn't reply, but I read it twice. Julian tried calling, texting, pleading. I blocked him. Then his lawyer reached out divorce papers, urgent tone, public image in crisis. I signed without reading. But I added a counterclaim compensation for assault, emotional distress, and defamation. He didn't contest it. The footage was proof enough. When I walked into the courthouse weeks later, I wore gray instead of white, neutral, composed. Julian looked smaller, the sharp edges of his arrogance dulled. His lawyer did the talking. When the judge ruled in my favor, awarding damages and sole discretion over public use of the footage, Julian finally looked at me. "You destroyed me," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "You just filmed your own downfall." The reporters outside asked if I felt vindicated. I said no. Vindication required joy, and I didn't feel any. Just quiet exhaustion, the kind that comes after surviving something that should have ended you. Veronica's trial began months later. The prosecution used my files as their backbone. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, I didn't celebrate. Justice isn't a climax, it's a cleanup. By then, the estate had been sold, the family name scrubbed from charity plaques. The Ashford lineage became a case study in arrogance and decay. I watched from a distance, unseen, unmoved. People called it karma. I called it math. Actions have outcomes. Lies leave trails. The system may crawl, but eventually it balances its books. On the day Veronica was sentenced, I took off my wedding ring for the last time. It wasn't a symbol anymore. Just Evidence Exhibit A in the case of Evelyn Hart versus the life she refused to lose. The silence after the storm was the hardest part. For weeks, my body existed in fragments, sleep without rest, food without taste, daylight without meaning. My uncle made tea every morning, the kind my mother used to drink when she was still alive. "It steadies the nerves," he'd say. I drank it because routine was something I could control. The world saw me as a warrior, but I felt more like a survivor of an unseen fire, alive but charred inside. The slap had stopped ringing in my ears, yet it lived beneath my skin, a phantom echo that surfaced whenever a door slammed or a voice rose too suddenly. My therapist called it residual trauma. I called it remembering. Healing wasn't cinematic. It came in quiet tasks, washing dishes, walking at dawn, rebuilding an identity that had been measured by someone else's approval. I moved to San Diego, far from the Ashfords' reach and the ghosts of New York. The apartment I found was small, sunlit, close to the ocean. The first night I slept with the windows open and let the wind move through everything I owned. It felt like exhaling for the first time in years. I started my own accounting firm, a modest practice specializing in forensic audits. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same tools I had used to expose Veronica became the foundation for my new life. Clients came slowly at first. Small businesses, women, divorcing men who hid assets, nonprofits trying to trace missing funds. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. Word spread quietly, the woman who catches ghosts in numbers. Every case I took felt like an act of reclamation. Each hidden transaction I exposed reminded me that truth once documented doesn't die. When my daughter Grace was born, everything shifted again. She had Julian's eyes green-gray, like rain over steel. For a moment, that resemblance scared me. But when she smiled, it was all me. Soft defiance, calm strength. I promised her the world would never teach her silence the way it taught me. At night, I'd rock her and whisper, "You come from survival, not shame." My work flourished. By the time Grace turned 3, my firm had uncovered multiple corporate fraud cases, several tied to high-profile executives. Newspapers began calling me the quiet accountant. I liked that. It wasn't fame, it was integrity being noticed. Sometimes after Grace fell asleep, I'd watch the ocean through the window and think about Julian. He had vanished from the headlines after the divorce, retreating somewhere behind his own ruin. I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred required energy, and mine belonged elsewhere. I pitied him maybe for never learning the difference between power and control. Once my lawyer forwarded a request Julian wanted supervised visitation rights. I agreed not out of forgiveness, but out of law. The first time he saw Grace, he cried. Not loudly, not theatrically, just quiet tears that looked almost human. When the visit ended, he said, "She has your strength." I replied, "No. She has what you tried to destroy in me." He nodded, and for the first time, he didn't argue. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to live in a world where memory coexists with peace. Every scar on my heart became a ledger entry pane balanced by purpose. I used to think closure meant winning. Now I understood it was simply the absence of needing to. I stopped watching the news when Veronica's appeal was denied. I didn't celebrate. I didn't curse. I filed the moment away under justice served another calculation settled. The woman I had been the bride in the ruined garden no longer existed. In her place stood someone quieter, sharper, unafraid to speak truth even when her voice trembled. One afternoon, as Grace built towers out of blocks beside me, she looked up and asked Mama, "Why do you work with numbers?" I smiled. "Because numbers tell the truth even when people don't." She nodded solemnly and said, "Then I want to do that too." I looked at her, the light spilling through her curls, and thought, this is what survival looks like when it finally blooms. 3 years later, I was sitting in my office when an envelope arrived without a return address. The paper was heavy, the handwriting familiar. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks earlier. It was from Veronica. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means my appeal failed and I've started serving my sentence. I won't waste words asking for forgiveness. I'm not sorry for what I did to Julian's company. I'm only sorry for what I did to you. You were collateral damage in a war you never agreed to fight. I hated you because you were everything I wasn't: calm, precise, incorruptible. You didn't need to manipulate to be loved. I did. You won because you survived, because you're still building while we rot in the ruins we made. Don't let the world turn you bitter." V. I stared at her signature for a long time. The woman who had destroyed my wedding. My peace, my sense of safety had written the only letter that didn't lie. I didn't feel triumph, just understanding the quiet kind that comes when the story finally closes. I didn't reply. Some ghosts don't need conversation. A week later, Julian called. I hadn't heard his voice in years. He sounded older, his words slower, as if he'd learned to measure them before speaking. "Veronica's gone," he said. "Cancer." It was fast. I said nothing. He cleared his throat. "She left something for Grace. A trust fund. $2 million locked until she's 25. It's clean money." I checked. My hand tightened around the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she wanted Grace to have a chance neither of us did to be free from needing anyone." His voice cracked. "And because I wanted you to know I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand the man I was." I closed my eyes. "That's between you and your mirror, Julian." "I know," he said softly, "but I also needed to tell you that you were right. About everything." There was a pause, heavy and human. "Are you happy?" I looked around my office, the diplomas on the wall, the photo of Grace at the beach, the sunlight spilling across the floor. "Yes," I said, "I am." He exhaled the sound thin. "That's good. Goodbye, Evelyn." When the line went dead, I didn't cry. I simply sat there watching the city move outside my window and realized that peace doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly when you've stopped needing to be heard. That evening, Grace tugged at my sleeve. "Mama, can I see the ocean before dinner?" We walked down to the beach, the sky melting into orange and rose. She ran ahead, her laughter cutting through the wind, bright and unbroken. I thought of my mother, of every woman who'd been told to be silent, and I whispered to the horizon, "We don't stay quiet anymore." The tide reached our feet, cool and relentless. Grace turned and grinned. "Look, Mama, it's like the water's saying hi." "Maybe it is," I said, smiling. The letter from Veronica sat in my bag unopened again, already fading into memory. Some stories don't need revenge. They just need time to prove who deserved to survive them. Years have a strange way of softening the edges of memory without dulling its weight. Grace turned 12 last month. She's tall now, fierce in her opinions, and gentle in her logic. Sometimes I catch her studying me when she thinks I'm not looking, like she's measuring the woman I became against the stories she's overheard. Because the world still remembers me. The video still exists, buried deep online, but never erased. I've become a chapter in digital folklore, the bride who didn't flinch. I never set out to be a symbol. But when people send letters, women leaving abusive marriages, whistleblowers afraid to speak, young accountants discovering corruption, I read every one. I tell them the same thing I tell Grace. Truth isn't loud, it's patient. My firm has grown. We now handle federal-level audits, the kind that make powerful men nervous. My name opens doors, but it also draws shadows. I learned to live with that balance, the cost of visibility. Every case I take is a small rebellion against silence. When clients cry in my office, I hand them a glass of water and remind them, document everything. Justice isn't always a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's a paper trail, a chain of facts that can't be rewritten. That's what I teach Grace. I show her how to recognize manipulation in small things, how people use guilt as currency, how charm disguises control. She listens carefully, her brow furrowed like mine. "You sound like you're teaching me to be suspicious," she once said. I smiled. "No, love. I'm teaching you to see clearly." On the anniversary of my wedding, the one that never was, I take her to the same garden where it all fell apart. The estate is abandoned now, weeds crawling over the marble steps, vines claiming the fountain where my bouquet once fell. The air is still heavy with ghosts, but not the kind that hurt anymore. Grace runs ahead, her sneakers crunching the gravel. "This is where it happened?" she asks, wide-eyed. "Yes," I say, "but it's also where everything began." She looks around curious rather than afraid. "It doesn't look scary." "It isn't," I tell her. "Not anymore." She kneels to pick a wildflower growing through a crack in the stone. "You could build something here," she says thoughtfully. "A new house." I laugh softly. "Maybe one day. But for now, it's enough that we came back." She presses the flower into my palm, a single white bloom, resilient and uninvited. I tuck it into my notebook, the same one I once filled with evidence and fear. The pages are different now, plans for expansion, client notes, Grace's doodles. Proof that life continued. Later that night, I sit by the ocean after she's asleep. The air smells of salt and rain. I think of Julian, not the man who hit me, but the one who called years later, broken and repentant. I never saw him again. I heard through a colleague that he lectures at a community college now teaching business ethics. The irony doesn't sting anymore. Maybe that's justice too, facing yourself every day and the lessons you once ignored. Veronica's trust fund remains untouched, accruing interest for Grace's future. I'll tell her its origin someday when she's ready to understand that even poisoned roots can feed something good if you let them. People often ask how I forgave them. The truth is, I didn't. Forgiveness isn't owed, it's optional. What I gave myself instead was release. They no longer own a single second of my silence. That's enough. When I lock up my office each night, I look at the sign above the door, Hart and Associates Forensic Accounting and Justice Consulting. Beneath it, a smaller plaque reads, "Founded by Evelyn Hart, 2018. Truth has receipts." It always makes me smile, because the story didn't end in that garden. It evolved into purpose, into a legacy that refuses to bow. Sometimes when clients thank me with tears in their eyes, I think back to that moment. The crack of skin against skin, the garden's stunned breath, the decision that changed everything. I thought it was the moment I lost everything. It was the moment I reclaimed myself. I glance out at the city lights, each one flickering like a pulse of survival, and whisper the same promise I make every year: you can't destroy a woman who documents her truth. Justice wasn't loud that day. It was quiet, deliberate, written in ink and law instead of rage. But it was justice all the same, and in the end, that was enough.